The rights of trans people in Ontario and a growing number of provinces across Canada and around the world have been slow in coming. Much of this is because of the discrimination, harassment, and sometimes violence many trans people face every day. Despite the challenges, bias, and discrimination, trans people live, work, and thrive in society in meaningful ways. Trans individuals are represented in every social class, occupation, race, culture, religion, and sexual orientation. They live in and contribute to communities across Ontario and around the world. In 2012, all three parties of the Ontario Legislature co-sponsored Toby's Act, the bill that added gender identity and gender expression as prohibited grounds of discrimination under the Ontario Human Rights Code. It took 4 attempts at the legislature to pass this amendment. Adding these grounds make it clear that trans people and people with diverse genders are legally entitled to the same protections from discrimination and harassment based on race, age, disability, and all other grounds. For many years, the Ontario Human Rights Commission has interpreted the ground of sex to include rights for trans people and other people who don't conform to gender norms. But the addition of gender identity and gender expression is important because it unequivocally says that discriminating against someone or harassing them because of their gender identity or how they express their gender is against the law. It recognizes trans people as equal under the law and acknowledges their experience of discrimination as distinct. Changing the law was the first step to improving the lived experiences of transgender people. The law does not describe gender identity or gender expression, and it does not talk about what employers, services, and housing providers have to do to respect and support the rights of trans people. That's where the OHRC's policy on preventing discrimination because of gender identity and gender expression comes in. The OHRC's original policy on gender identity, published in 2000, was completely rewritten. The OHRC reached out to trans communities, healthcare workers, housing providers, social service organizations, educators, and others. The OHRC received over 750 online submissions and did one-on-one interviews and other consultations with key stakeholders. The OHRC heard many accounts of incidences and issues that simply should not happen in Ontario. Ontario's human rights legislation, known as the Ontario Human Rights Code, recognizes the inherent dignity and worth of every person and provides for equal rights and opportunities without discrimination. The Code aims to create a climate of understanding and mutual respect so that each person feels that they belong in the community and can contribute to it. Discrimination happens when a person experiences negative treatment or impact because of gender identity or gender expression, intentional or not. Negative stereotypes about a trans person can combine or intersect with their racial identity, family status, or other grounds to create unique experiences of discrimination. Discrimination can be direct and obvious or subtle and hidden. It can occur at a systemic level where organizational rules or policies may look neutral but actually exclude trans people. Regardless of the type of discrimination, discrimination is harmful just the same and is prohibited under the Code. Trans people and other gender-diverse individuals are protected from discrimination and harassment in the following areas: employment, housing, facilities and services, contracts, and membership in unions, trades, or professional associations. Friends, family, or others who face discrimination because of their association with a trans person are also protected. Trans people and other persons can also experience gender-based harassment and sexual harassment, or a combination of both and other grounds. Harassment includes ongoing unwelcome behavior that can include sexually explicit or other inappropriate comments, questions, jokes, name-calling, images, email and social media, transphobic, homophobic, or other bullying, sexual advances, touching, threats, or violence. Harassment can also result in a poisoned environment, all of which is prohibited under the Code. The policy also helps to clarify the law and help organizations put practices in place that can hopefully prevent discrimination and harassment from happening again. The policy gives people of diverse genders, employers, service providers, housing providers, tribunals, and the courts a consistent message that discriminating because of gender identity and gender expression is against the law in Ontario. It also offers organizations tools they need to bring down barriers and to respect human rights. The policy clarifies terminology, provides key issues affecting the community in employment, education, services, and the justice system. It also refers to case law and provides guidelines for best practices. What do we mean when we say gender identity or gender expression? In the policy, gender identity is described as each person's internal and individual experience of gender. It's a person's sense of being a woman, a man, both, neither, or anywhere along the gender spectrum. A person's gender identity may be the same as or different from their birth-assigned sex. The policy defines gender expression as how a person publicly expresses or presents their gender. This can include behavior and outward appearance such as dress, hair, makeup, body language, and voice. A person's chosen name and pronoun are also common ways of expressing gender. A person's gender identity and gender expression is fundamentally different from and not related to their sexual orientation. The policy also talks about some basic rights. The right to self-identify gender is a basic aspect of self-determination, dignity, and freedom. For example, whether or not a trans person has undergone surgery, whether or not identity documents are up to date, a trans individual should be recognized and treated as the gender they live in. Trans people have the right to be called the name they choose and to be referred to with the pronoun they choose. Organizations, their members and staff can be held liable for discrimination and harassment. They must take steps to provide a safe, welcoming environment for trans people, to prevent problems and to deal with complaints. Organizations also have a legal duty to accommodate trans people up to the point of undue hardship, a pretty high standard. Organizations have to respect and protect the privacy of trans people. For example, employers do not need to know the details of someone's transition process beyond what is needed to respect that process and to help accommodate any work-related needs. People who are not trans don't talk about their physiology in day-to-day interactions. Therefore, there's no need to base dealings with trans people on physical characteristics. Many trans people do not need accommodations and have a right to access facilities and services or jobs and housing like everyone else, without discrimination and harassment. The duty to accommodate goes hand in hand with the goal of inclusion. Identity documents such as birth certificates, health cards, passports, driver's license, etc. might not match the lived gender identity of a trans person. Discrepancies on official documents can create barriers, disadvantage, and even health and safety risks for trans individuals. Trans people can have their name and sex designation changed on identity documents and other records to match their lived gender identity. Organizations should have a valid reason for collecting and using personal information that identifies a person's gender. They should keep this information confidential. The criteria and process for collecting and changing information should not be intrusive or medically based. Transitioning refers to the activities and process that people may follow to help them live their felt gender identity. This can be very different for each person, and some may always be in a state of transition. Individuals who are undergoing a transition may need accommodations. It's important to note that transitioning can be a difficult and stressful time. Respect, understanding, and confidentiality are everyone's responsibility during transition and the accommodation process. Organizations should be alert to preventing and addressing any harassment that may happen. Developing policies and training staff will also help prevent problems during transition. Trans people have a right to access washrooms and change rooms based on their lived gender identity. This is at the core of human dignity. Some people may need accommodation, temporary or otherwise, to access washrooms, change rooms, or other type of sex-segregated facility. An employer or service provider has the duty to accommodate such requests unless doing so would cause undue hardship. Inclusive options benefit everyone. For example, individual shower and changing stalls with curtains or doors. Gender-neutral single-user or universal washrooms. The Ontario Building Code regulation has improved standards for single-user gender-neutral washrooms as well as universal washrooms. The standards only apply to new buildings or major renovations. Some employers, educational institutions, service providers like swimming pools, or residential facilities like hospitals or jails may have rules about what people wear. These requirements should be legitimate and based on the circumstances. They should not negatively affect trans people or others protected under the code. Dress codes must be genuine, inclusive, flexible, and reasonably necessary and should not be based solely on gender stereotypes. Dress codes should not prevent trans people and others from dressing according to their expressed gender. A trans person should have access to shelter services that match their lived gender identity. For example, a young person seeks services at a youth shelter that has a male and female floor. The birth-assigned sex is male, but she identifies as female. She requests to stay on the female floor, and the shelter agrees. The shelter also takes steps to educate clients and staff in the shelter about gender identity and human rights. Safety from harassment and violence inside shelters is a pressing concern, and trans people are particularly vulnerable. For example, a trans man may not feel safe in a men's shelter and may ask for access to a women's shelter, or to a separate space within a men's or a women's shelter. Trans people are especially disadvantaged and vulnerable when dealing with police, correctional institutions, and other service providers in positions of power. It's vital that law enforcement services develop policies as well as education and training for police and correctional services staff to meet the needs of trans people and to address the discrimination, harassment, and violence they report facing in law enforcement situations. In situations requiring strip searches, police and correctional institution officers need to offer trans persons a choice of the sex of the officer who searches them, including the option of only male officers, female officers, or a split search with both male and female officers. Inmates whose gender identity is different from their birth-assigned sex should be assessed and accommodated on an individual basis. To the greatest extent possible, institutions should provide trans inmates with housing that is appropriate for their lived gender identity. Trans people report facing discriminatory treatment in employment. The Ontario-based Trans Pulse conducted a survey in which 18% of respondents said they were turned down for a job because of their trans identity. 13% said they were fired from a job or constructively dismissed because they are trans. The code says that every person has a right to equal treatment in employment without discrimination and harassment because of gender identity and gender expression. This includes any accommodation that may be necessary and applies to all stages of employment, from hiring to retention, pay and benefits and dress codes, to training and promotion, performance management, and termination. Trans people also have the right to be free from discrimination and harassment in vocational associations, like unions, in housing accommodation, in healthcare, retail stores, and other services. The OHRC's policy on preventing discrimination because of gender identity and gender expression is an important tool. It interprets the rights trans and other gender-diverse people have under the Code to inclusion, to accommodation, and to make a meaningful contribution where they work, live, and get services, and even where they play. These are basic rights and obligations that we all have in Ontario, and it's time to make what's written in our laws a lived reality for trans Ontarians.